She had power, money, control, and she believed she understood people. Then one careless bet stripped all of that away. Overnight, a wealthy female CEO was forced into a world she had only judged from a distance, living under the same roof as a single black father she barely knew. No boardrooms. No assistants. No escape. At first, she saw only stereotypes. But slowly, something began to crack. What started as punishment became confrontation. And what she discovered about herself would change everything. The question is, was she ready to face the truth she'd been avoiding her entire life? Before the bet, her life was built on certainty. As a high-ranking CEO, she moved through the world with confidence that came from privilege, structure, and success. Every morning followed a strict rhythm: executive meetings, private drivers, glass offices overlooking a city that seemed to obey her decisions. She believed hard work explained everything she had achieved. Struggle, to her, was a temporary phase people failed to escape. The bet itself felt harmless. A careless challenge made in a room full of laughter and ego. She never imagined she could lose. But she did. And suddenly, everything familiar was gone. Instead of luxury, she found herself standing in front of a modest suburban home. Instead of control, she faced discomfort. The man she was forced to live with was a single black father, quiet, reserved, carrying responsibilities she had never had to imagine. He lived a life shaped by routines very different from her own. Early mornings. Long hours. Silent sacrifices. At first, she treated the situation like an inconvenience. A temporary punishment. Something to endure until her normal life returned. She kept emotional distance, convincing herself she didn't belong there. But the house had a way of exposing truths. The small details unsettled her: the worn furniture, the careful budgeting, the exhaustion etched into daily life. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't failure. It was survival. And beneath her irritation, something else began to surface. Discomfort. Because for the first time, she was forced to sit inside a reality she had always judged from afar, one shaped by race, responsibility, and resilience she never had to develop. She didn't know it yet, but this forced closeness was about to challenge everything she believed about fairness, success, and herself. Living together quickly stopped feeling like a temporary inconvenience. The differences between their worlds surfaced in ways she couldn't ignore. Simple routines became reminders of how unfamiliar this life was to her. He planned every dollar, every meal, every hour. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was assumed. While she had spent years believing discipline was a personal choice, she now saw how survival demanded it. At first, she watched from a distance, quietly judging. She noticed how neighbors reacted differently to him. How conversations ended faster. How eyes lingered longer. She told herself she was imagining it. That she was overthinking things. But the moments kept adding up. A delivery truck slowed when he stepped outside, the driver watching too closely. A store receipt was checked twice. A police car passed slowly, then circled back. Each incident was small enough to dismiss, but together, they formed a pattern she had never experienced. What unsettled her most was how normal it all seemed to him. There was no outrage. No surprise. Just patience. Caution. Silence. She began to realize how often he calculated his movements, how to stand, when to speak, how much space to take up. Things she had never once had to consider. While she moved freely through the world, he moved carefully. One afternoon, she noticed the exhaustion in him wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Carrying responsibility alone. Raising a child while navigating a society that expected failure from him before effort. She had once believed success was purely earned. Now she saw how uneven the starting lines truly were. The discomfort inside her grew. She caught herself making assumptions, then questioning them. Catching herself feeling uneasy, then asking why. The realization that her confidence had been built on advantages she never acknowledged made her defensive. It was easier to blame him for being too quiet, too guarded, too distant. But deep down, she knew the truth. He wasn't distant. He was protecting himself. The tension reached its peak when an incident unfolded outside the home. A misunderstanding. Raised voices. Strangers watching. Phones recording. She stood frozen, witnessing fear she had only ever seen on screens. For the first time, she wasn't observing from a safe distance, she was inside the moment. Her heart raced, not because she was in danger, but because she finally understood that he always was. That night, the house felt heavier than before. The silence louder. The walls closer. Her certainty began to crumble. The world she believed was fair suddenly felt unfamiliar. And for the first time in her life, she asked herself a question that terrified her. What if everything she believed about equality, effort, and justice had been incomplete? She didn't know it yet, but the next moment would force her to confront that truth head-on. The moment unfolded faster than she could process. It started as an ordinary afternoon, quiet streets, familiar routines. Then a single misunderstanding ignited everything. Accusations were made without proof. Suspicion arrived before facts. Authority stepped in with force that felt immediate and overwhelming. She stood just a few steps away, powerless. For the first time in her life, she watched someone be treated as guilty before being heard. Every movement he made was watched. Every breath measured. His calm wasn't confidence, it was survival. He knew the cost of the wrong gesture, the wrong tone, the wrong second. Her chest tightened as the reality sank in. This wasn't about behavior. It wasn't about evidence. It was about perception. Strangers gathered. Phones rose. Whispers spread. The situation balanced on a fragile edge where one mistake could become irreversible. She wanted to speak, to intervene, to demand fairness, but she hesitated. Not because she lacked authority, but because she had never learned how to use it in moments like this. And in that hesitation, she understood something devastating. Silence was part of the problem. When the situation finally de-escalated, relief didn't follow. Shame did. The kind that settles deep and refuses to leave. She hadn't caused the injustice, but she had lived comfortably beside it for years. As the crowd dispersed, she saw the exhaustion in him. Not relief. Not anger. Just the weight of experience repeating itself again. Back inside the house, the atmosphere was different. The space felt smaller. The air heavier. Something had shifted permanently. She had entered that house believing she was being punished by a lost bet. But now she knew the truth. The real punishment was finally seeing the world as it was, and realizing she could never unsee it again. She didn't return to her old life the same way she left it. The days that followed were quieter, but heavier. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface, yet everything inside her had shifted. The house no longer felt like a punishment, it felt like a mirror. Every routine, every moment of silence forced her to sit with truths she had spent years ignoring. She began to notice how carefully he carried himself, even at home. How responsibility never rested. How strength, in his world, wasn't loud or celebrated, it was constant and unseen. Raising a child alone. Navigating judgment daily. Enduring suspicion without reaction. This wasn't weakness. It was resilience. For the first time, she questioned the story she had always told herself about success. She had believed the world rewarded effort equally. That fairness was built into the system. That anyone could reach the top if they worked hard enough. Living beside him shattered that illusion. She finally understood how much of her confidence came from never being doubted, never being feared, never being reduced to a stereotype. The bet ended. The arrangement was over. She could leave. But the truth stayed. She didn't walk away from that house feeling like a hero. She walked away aware of how silence enables injustice, how comfort blinds conscience, and how change begins long before public action. It begins with seeing people fully, not conveniently. This wasn't just one story. It was a reflection of countless lives lived under quiet pressure every day. Lives judged before being known. Lives forced to prove worth that should never be questioned. The question isn't whether racism exists. The question is how many people still have the privilege not to see it, and how much longer that silence will last. Because once you truly see the truth, you're responsible for what you do next.